Thanks for joining me on Beyond the Water Cooler. I only have a few more sessions in this format before a potential big revamp of the podcast following a survey live in January. I'm seeking your feedback about what's needed for the future of this podcast to provide most value. If it's still January and you're listening to this and you haven't already done so, please click on the link in the show notes and tell me what you want. Until then, I'll continue to have the conversations that matter about putting the human factor back into business, because when we get people right, we get business right, with guests who know about all things leadership, engagement, mental well-being and high performance. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist and psychotherapist and founder of It's Time for Change. Let's dive in. I'm trading places and I'm bringing to you a podcast where I was the guest so that you can hear more of my views and expertise on different subjects. These conversations are all about dealing with challenges and questions that consume headspace, whether that's knowing how best to support people, reduce overwhelm, or develop better ways of working. I'm here to help you work out how to do things differently, ultimately increasing employee happiness and outcomes.
Well, welcome to this episode of Being Playful. Today, I'm joined by Lisa Lloyd. Lisa, welcome to the show. Welcome to the episode.
Thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to this. I don't think I've ever talked specifically about playfulness before, so this will be good.
This is your chance. No, it's so good to get you on. I'm going to get you to explain to the listeners what you do and kind of the businesses that you run and the things that you get involved in. But one of the things that really stood out for me, so I went onto your website, It's Time for Change, and there's a motto that you have, or you've put it in there, and I think it's a beautiful place to start the conversation, because playfulness, to me anyway, is about human flourishing. And the motto you have is, when we get people right, we get business right. So I'm going to now ask you to kind of not only explain that, but can you explain that through the lens of what you do and kind of the services you offer and who you work with and all that wonderful stuff.
Gosh. So yeah, I came up with that motto, that mantra years ago, and I think it still really sticks today. I haven't moved away from it at all. Essentially, I was seeing businesses working really hard to kind of achieve their goals and to push people harder and focusing kind of I call the business side of business. And actually, I spend all my time, regardless of what hat I'm wearing, encouraging people just to think again about the people and the human side of business. And if we can look after people and get the environment right for them, lots of people talk about workplace culture, lots of people talk about leadership and development, managers, and so on. But it all comes down to actually the environment in which we are part of. If that enables us to thrive and to flourish and to feel connected and to feel rewarded and to have a clear sense of direction and all those kind of needs, if those needs are met, then we're able to really excel and we feel good about what we do, and then we do it even better. And for me, it's about creating the right environment so that people can perform well, rather than trying to focus on getting people to perform better and missing the people side of it.
Well put. I think that was a lovely summary. I mean, there's so many directions we could take this, but I think let's start with kind of that idea of environment. I don't know whether you've got stories either through your work or your personal kind of experience of life, but one of the things one of the ambitions of this podcast is to normalize the language around playfulness, because we have such a poor understanding of playfulness generally. I know that we've spoken, and therefore it's. I probably won't get an unbiased answer if I ask you what playfulness is now. But most people kind of revolve around the idea of humor, silliness, frivolity, fun, and those elements can exist, but they're not. They're a very narrow vision of playfulness. And so kind of normalizing the language of playfulness, that environment is so important, and that's one of the crossovers between us. Have you got examples of where you've seen the environment be right and people flourish, or the environment be completely wrong and they really don't flourish?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there are so many organizations I've been into where people are working in a way that's very structured, very rigid, working through a sense of I've got to hit my targets, otherwise I get criticized. I'm afraid of doing something wrong, um, trying to second guess everything because I can't be seen to ask, misinterpreting everything because we're kind of on the defensive, and therefore our brain is looking at all the cues around us and probably looking at a very negative side of what actually potentially isn't a threat at all. So you see environments like that, and people are very contained and they're very restricted, and they are delivering what they think they're supposed to be delivering in a very kind of formal way, and it really restricts people. And then I've been to other organizations, or not even a whole organization, it could be a team within an organization because teams really differ depending on their manager. You go into a team that you can almost sense straight away that ease with which people are present and their level of comfort. And it's not, and I think some people who are perhaps of the old school type would look at that and go, well, everyone looks way too relaxed here. But they have way too much fun. Uh, and it's like, actually, this is the time when people perform at their best because people are open to new ideas. People are open to, they connect more easily. Um, our brain is much more likely to be able to problem solve effectively and to be imaginative and be innovative. And when you're in an environment where you are encouraged to play and and for me that's quite close to kind of the idea of experimenting, to be able
Mm.
to do something different to what's expected of us. So I remember going back a long, long, long time ago when I worked with gosh, wearing a completely different hat, and I was working with some communities around helping improve outcomes for young people. And I was doing that a whole variety of means, and one of those was about engaging parents to engage more meaningfully with their children to improve outcomes for children. And one of those things was around how to play and how to build positive relationships. And so that would be the sort of thing like imagine you're playing a game, imagine you've got a doll's house, and your child comes along and wants to put the bed in the kitchen. Now, as most adults, we go, no, no, no. The bed doesn't go in the kitchen. The bed goes in the bedroom. And it's like, well, why does that have to be? What happened if perhaps today we just put it in the kitchen? Right, so we end up having these rules, and it really restricts how we do things. And the brilliant businesses who are happy to experiment and to give people permission to kind of step back from this is just how we do it here, and you just got to do it like that, and to actually actively seek different ways of doing things, that's when you stumble upon some like ingenious idea, or someone's had permission to go and explore something over here that no one's had a look at before, try something different, and you never know what's going to happen. But if people are doing it for the right intention, then no bad's going to come of it. But you've got to have permission from the people who set that environment to say, this is what we do here. We play, we experiment, we try to break the mold a little bit because that's what's going to make us stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with what you've just kind of said there. One of the things which comes to mind for me here is it's really kind of if we step all the way back and look at the world as it stands today. I mean, it's a highly disruptive world that we live in, which has its own effects on our feeling of safety anyway.
Mm,
But from a business point of view, I think we've come from an era where businesses have been able to kind of, I don't know, just chase efficiency and reduce variability. And now they're in a world where actually, if they don't keep up, if they aren't experimenting and learning and innovating, even if it's not innovation as in kind of technological innovation, it's just innovation of process and everything else that goes on, then they're simply just, well, my view is they're not going to survive.
yeah, yeah,
And
definitely.
it's a complete shift of where we've been, and I think for me, that's part of the reason why we see so much disengagement, resistance to change, low job satisfaction, stress, burnout. I mean, we can throw all of these things in the ring, can't we? But yeah, I
Yeah, and
don't know whether you've seen that.
I think well, so interestingly, I've just been working with a client of having an hour session with an MD, talking about the fact that he realizes his business needs to change to be uh, good and the right fit for the future.
Mhm.
And he's aware that people are very, very good at their job in their particular industry, construction industry. They're very good at what they do, but they don't necessarily have the right interpersonal skills. They don't have the right leadership skills. Haven't thought about how they work together as a team. And that's not uncommon. And I think the common factor I see, which really almost paralyzes people into not doing anything useful at all, is that they don't know what to do. So this guy I was talking with said, I don't know what the plan should be. I don't know what to do. We've done this little bit so far, and I will just go and ask some questions, just go and have a conversation with people. And it's like, but I don't know what the answers should be. And I think sometimes people, if they can't, people are so used to having a really clear business plan that's all, everything's mapped out, and I know exactly what I'm doing and how it's going to look and what my milestones are. And if they don't have that, it can almost stop people from even taking that first step. And so I'm a real fan of just being able to have that conversation and say, you know what, I've noticed this about you. I noticed you're great at this, this, and this. I noticed that actually sometimes you struggle a bit more on these things, or I wonder how you feel about, we were talking about competencies. So, if you're looking at where you are now, where you need to get to, how motivated are you to get there, and what do you think is going to help you, and just have an exploratory conversation. And once you have those sorts of conversations, what needs to happen next often emerges. You don't have to come up with the answers yourself, but again, it's giving yourself permission to not know the answers and just to say, I recognize we've got something to do in this space. I don't really know what it is, but I'm going to put it out on the table and let's just chew it over. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a natural state of play or playfulness.
Yeah.
Where I don't know if you're playing a game of Monopoly with a family. That's only come to mind because it's coming up to Christmas when we're recording this, which seems to be the time of year I get Monopoly out. And you don't know if the strategy you're using is going to be the one which you will use throughout the game, or that it will win. But you just test it. You go, okay, well, I'm going to buy
Mm,
some more hotels, and I'll just see how that works. And so one of the beauties of play and playfulness as the mindset, is that it increases our tolerance of ambiguity. So we're able to sit in kind of what I'd call a liminal space, where that space in between the current and the future, the knowing and the not knowing. And
mm,
that's so vital, isn't it? Because without that tolerance of ambiguity, we essentially go into a stress response and then crave certainty, even if and you'll know this full well, that we start even making things up in our own head because we want something, even if it's not true, even if it's just something we've made up. It makes us
yeah,
feel a bit better.
yeah, yeah. And I couldn't agree more with that. And I think what's really interesting is you just explained that really well. I think um, so when I go into organizations and you know, people, if they don't know me already, they'll be like, oh my gosh, what's Lisa going to be like? She's a psychologist. She's going to be coming in kind of with a clipboard and analyzing us all. And we're like, no, let's scrap that. I'm not like that at all. And actually, what I'm talking about is what you've just described brilliantly in terms of it's understanding that actually when our environment is like this, our brain will respond like that.
Mhm.
And so, what can we do differently to feel okay about our environment? So, if we are in a period of uncertainty and change and all sorts of other challenges, what do we know about ourselves in terms of how we respond to that? And what do we know that we need in order to feel okay navigating and riding that uncertainty? Is it about actually how I look after myself in that space? Is it about how I need to be able to park recognize the stress and then know how to park that so I can actually focus on some stuff over here so I don't become all consumed with I don't know the answers and therefore I'm just panicking. It's like, well, what do I know? What's within my control or my sphere of influence? And being able to kind of just start normalizing our own emotional responses, sharing those with each other. Again, the guy I was working with just now was talking about actually I just need to be more self-aware so that when I know I'm withdrawing, so for him it's about when stuff's getting too much, he withdraws. So how does he recognize when he's withdrawing? And actually, does he need to share that with his family or with his colleagues so that they can point out what does he then do about it? And it's all those sorts of things that it just normalizes what's going on for us as human beings, but recognizing that we are a human at work. And the more we understand about each other, the more we can support each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you've kind of like reminded me of. So I developed a method called the PPM method, which is pause, play, move. And the reason for developing it is that playfulness is so linked to our stress response that, kind of most people's understanding of the stress response is either we're stressed or we're not.
Mm,
Um, so firstly, they miss that it's a scale. But secondly, it's kind of the idea that we're either in this fight and flight response, completely emotionally dysregulated, or freeze or fawn, or we're nothing at all. And it's completely not true. The other end of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn is actually joy and playfulness.
yeah.
And so in the PPM method, the first step is pause, because you've got to have that process of just stop,
Mm,
even for if it's, I call them micro pauses. That it's not a
mm,
vacation. It's not
yes.
like, oh my word, I'm going to close the computer and come back to it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Once you practice it, it can just be a few seconds. You just go, where am I firing? Like what's going on for me internally? And if I'm like kind of, I like to use it on a scale of 1 to 5. You normally, if you can catch yourself at 2, 3, 4, and just go, this is the last place I want to be making decisions.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Yes. Yeah. And I think that the pause, I talk a lot about pausing. And when we hit I talk about doing less to achieve more. And it's about actually just pause, because what we end up doing is feeling like we're on this kind of conveyor belt as hamster wheel, just running at full speed and just being consumed with my ever ending inbox, which is always overflowing, or this list of to do jobs, or whatever, as the number of meetings we spend our time in. And it just can feel like we've just got to get our head down and go through it all and just try to get on top of it. And of course, we never get on top of it, really, because as soon as you finish, you get through your emails, a whole load more come in. So it's about actually being able to press pause, and I always think kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture. So if you can press pause enough to think, right, I'm just going to park all this mental noise, all this noise around me, and just take a big step back and go, wow, what is it I'm actually here for? What is it I'm trying to achieve? What's important for me as an individual about how I'm showing up and how I'm performing? What's needed of me from those around me and my organization? And as soon as we start to zoom out a little bit, and we can kind of get out of the weeds. And the number of people I talk to, particularly leaders and managers, who say, I'm just stuck in the weeds with all the small stuff, and I'm not getting the stuff done. It's like you need to come out of that. You need to take a step back. But you can only do that when you pause and go, what's really going on for me right now? And what does it feel okay? Or if it doesn't feel okay, what can I do about it? And not necessarily having the answers, but just acknowledging something doesn't feel right, so that you can then begin to think about what could be different.
yeah, completely. And that's often enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again, you'll see this in individuals in your work, and I see them when I'm working with them, is that just acknowledging that, oh my word, I'm quite stressed here. Or, oh my word, I'm feeling, I don't know, real guilt about this, or I'm feeling
Yeah.
real anger, is normally
Yeah.
enough for the body to go, oh, great. Do you know what? You noticed me.
Mm.
I'll let this go now.
And also then being able to communicate that with other people. So again, I see it a lot where someone will be really stressed for something, but they won't communicate that. So then everyone else around them just picks it up as like, well, they're just a grumpy so and so. I'm not going to swear. Or what have I done wrong? And all this damage that comes from that person being in an emotional state that happens to be just a natural response to a situation. Whereas if we can say this has happened, or this is worrying me, and that's why I'm responding like this. Don't take it personally. I'm taking steps to deal with it. It's like everyone's like, you can almost hear the sigh of relief.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see this in families too.
Mm,
Kind of when we look at that idea in families, certainly young children in that kind of imprinting age of like 0 to 7, where we're really learning how to emotionally regulate and everything else. If the parent doesn't admit that they're feeling angry, sad, then the child has no way of understanding how to
exactly.
process that emotion. And I believe we see it in the organization as well.
Mm,
In that we are constantly, I mean, the start of this conversation, we started talking about environment. And that influences the environment because we constantly talk about how incredible this brain is that we carry around in our head, but we forget how incredible our nervous system is as a sensory device. And if the boss is walking around highly stressed, not admitting he's stressed,
Mm,
what we're feeling is like on edge at
mm.
the very least.
Yeah,
Like it's not
right.
safe.
Yeah, and I think when the boss is able to say, "You know what? I'm actually feeling really stressed right now. This is not the right time for me to be in this meeting," or I can't have this conversation right now. I'll come back to it later. My head's not in the right space. When you take yourself out of that to calm yourself down, you're then role modeling to everyone else that you've got to own your feelings and you've got to take responsibility for them. And and again, some people will really worry about people who like complete control of others will worry about if I give people permission to do that, then they'll all be bailing out of meetings left, right, and center and saying, I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that because I'm feeling a bit stressed right now. Um, Actually, what happens is, on the whole, is that if you allow people to own their feelings and do what they need to do, you get a lot more from them. So if I was sitting at my desk and just feeling a bit kind of zoned out because I've just been looking at a screen for ages, going through email or doing whatever it is, and I know my energy's dropped or or something's happened, I feel really cross about it, then sitting here trying to do productive work, I know I'm not being very productive. Whereas actually if I was then to think, oh, you know what, I'm gonna just go for a speed walk around the block for 20 minutes and come back, I'll be like a different person. But again, it's about having permission to do what you need to do because if you don't, you impact on that environment for everyone else. And we talk about culture and so on, but that comes from the behaviors, how we are showing up, what we are doing, how we're relating to each other in an organization, in a room, in a space. That becomes part of that culture. Like when I come in here, are people allowed to be themselves and own that and take responsibility for that? Is everyone kind of holding on to everything, not recognizing it, and just trying to get through the day to go home?
Yeah, being completely inauthentic.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just showing up
exactly.
with a mask. Yeah.
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 Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah.
waiting for the clock to hit 5 and then they can walk out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's not a productive
No.
team or an engaged team.
No. No, absolutely not. And what they miss out on is, I like to then turn this to intelligences. So we've run in our modern world up until now anyway, of a very, very narrow band of what intelligence is. And
Mm.
I think one of the big changes is we're going to suddenly start having to redefine that because we're going to find AI is slightly better at us at
Yes.
academic or intellectual intelligence, the remembering of facts. We're not very good at it really. Uh, um, but where we are good and that we completely ignore is that kind of creative intelligence, natural intelligence,
Mm.
intrapersonal, interpersonal intelligences. And that
Yeah,
doesn't come from showing up and being inauthentic or not owning your own stuff going on inside.
exactly. And I think when people so last week I was talking at the Alliance of Independent Agencies event. They have an annual Festival of Happiness for high performance, and it was at the Google offices in London. And we were talking about AI and a threat to, how people feel about that, responding to it, and so on. And that event, that industry is all around marketing and it's all around being creative. And you've got to be really innovative and just have really great severe imagination. And of course, if you're stressed, you can't do that. That's what it blocks it. So the whole idea of creating an environment for people to be happy and for people to be relaxed in what they're doing means that they can then perform well. And so that whole idea of happiness being a key driver for high performance is absolutely essential. And again, talking with the organizers of the event, because I've spoken a couple of times now, this year they were like, oh, should we call it the Festival of Happiness? Like, is happiness, it's a bit like you and talking about playfulness. It's like, is that really business speak? And I'm so pleased. I put on LinkedIn, I was so pleased you kept the name because yes, they've added on, happiness and but with peak performance or high performance, because essentially that's what the ultimate aim is for businesses. But the happiness bit, we can't get rid of that. If people are happy, they perform well and they feel good about what they do and they're engaged and they talk well of their company and they want to stay and all that stuff that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at these things, happiness is an outcome of, it's a signal that something else underneath is going well.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Essentially,
Exactly.
if
Exactly.
we look at it that way. So again, if we
Yeah.
come back to the stress response, one of the changes that happens when we're stressed, we narrow our focus, and we also become pessimistic.
Mm.
And, for very good reasons, because if the
Yeah,
lion
you,
was walking past our cave, we don't want to be like thinking about what we're going to do in 10 years' time
yeah,
and
yeah.
be truly optimistic that, oh, well, this would make a nice pet.
Mm.
We wouldn't be here anymore. Um, and so as you come down the stress scale, the other two things happen is that you lengthen out your field of vision. You start to lengthen out your time horizon that you think over, and you
Mm.
become more optimistic. You
Uh,
orientate towards positivity and happiness
yeah.
and joy
Yes.
and fun and all these wonderful things which are human.
Yeah. And when we have AI in a world allowing, sort of taking over the stuff that AI is really good at, it frees us up the time to do this other stuff. So, being able to hit pause, because actually I'm not run off my feet doing all this mundane stuff that actually AI could probably do. What it allows me to do is to bring bring to my world what I'm about as a human being, which is about real connection, and it's about imagination and creativity and kind of being dynamic and actually just holding a space for people to reflect and to plan and so on from a human perspective. And of course, so when people feel threatened about AI, I always go back to that sense of, well, just let that do the stuff that you don't really want to do in your job anyway, and that actually you find a bit boring and it's a bit time consuming, and give yourself space to be creative, be playful, and do all the stuff that actually you might enjoy. Or some people are like, oh gosh, I can't imagine like that feels too free. Like I need structure. You can still structure, you can still work around a sense of structure. It's not about kind of a free blank canvas and you can do whatever you like, however you like. Um, but it is about being able to use the opportunity, using the resources you've got to maximize what you're doing. That's being conscious about how you're showing up and what you're doing and how you're using your time rather than I'm just going to do this even though I don't really need to do it.
Yeah, and that piece about kind of connection.
Mm,
Again, that's a massive bit of playfulness. The playfulness acts as a social glue. I mean, it's one of
yeah,
perhaps its evolutionary purposes. Um, in that it allows us to, I don't know, kind of be open-minded, bring in other people's views. Again, when we look at the stress response, I keep bringing this back in the conversation today. But when we look at our stress response, at the very stress end, we are closed-minded. We're
mm,
rigid. We are
massively. Yeah,
defensive, that we have an
yeah,
idea and that is what needs to be done. And if you've got a
yeah,
different idea, well, on your bike.
yeah,
Um, when we're playful or we're not stressed, then we're suddenly open to others. We're open to their opinion, and we're curious enough to go, okay, well, what's your view? And I think one of the things which is really, really overlooked is organizations talk an awful lot about we want more cooperation. We want more
yeah.
collaboration. Those are wonderful. They really are wonderful things.
Mm,
But we want actually more co-opetition. So that idea of being able to challenge each other, and that can only exist in an environment where people are playful.
yeah,
Because in an environment where they're feeling threatened, you don't get that. You just get a
no.
shouting match.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you said it really well in terms of the curiosity bit. And for me, curiosity fits into so many different aspects of being playful and being human at work. Because if we don't know to problem solve, if we don't know the answer to something, just be curious.
Mm.
I wonder, or I'm thinking about this, but I don't really know how to think about it, or what questions I should be asking, or that curiosity is really important. And I think when we can be curious and actively seek other people's opinions, what do you think about this? How do you see this? Again, you are naturally pulling people in, you're showing them respect, you're connecting people, you're much more likely to come up with an outcome that is a better fit because you've considered different views of the challenge or the issue. Um, so that curiosity is so, so important to move away from that kind of the rigid thinking, as you say, um, and keeping people just saying it's almost maintaining the status quo, keeping people saying what they should be saying rather than actually I've got a really good idea over here, but I'm not going to speak up just in case.
Yeah, because I'm worried that somebody else is just going to
Yeah,
flatten me
yeah,
with their own
exactly.
idea, and that's where
Yeah.
brainstorming sessions normally go wrong. Is that the same people share their ideas, and the ones who've normally got the really good ideas stay quiet in the corner.
Yes, you have to actively seek them. And I also talk sometimes about the bonus thinking hats and about wearing the different color hats. So again, let's say, right, let's imagine we're wearing the black hat now. What could be the problem with this scenario? We've come up with an idea. What could be the problem with it? Or let's get creative and let's think about, yellow hat or green hat thinking and actually begin to think. So you're prompting people to actively adopt a different mindset. And then it can take um, the angst away from if I speak up, I'm going to be seen to be negative. Or that sounds everyone loves that idea. So I don't want to now suggest a completely different idea because everyone seems to be really happy with that one. If we actively seek different perspectives, then it's giving everyone permission to speak up. And so that person who can be criticized for being the negative person, actually they have a role to play because we need to make sure we have thought about every scenario in when we make decisions. So we need to go into it with our eyes wide open, have thought about potential barriers and actually how do we overcome those potential barriers because we've already registered them rather than let's just see what happens and keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you look at that, I mean, let's take this to kind of an environment where people aren't functioning well,
Yeah.
that we might come across in psychotherapy or something.
Mm.
One of the things you'll likely notice is they tend to have a single view and very, very hold on to it as a no, this is the way the world works for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what you're kind of seeing there in that exercise is it's natural when we're flourishing or thriving to seek other perspectives, to stand in other shoes and to look back with, oh, that's how it looks from over here. And when we're not flourishing, we tend to only see it from one perspective.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we see it in so many different modalities of psychotherapy. Constantly, kind of one of the similarities is it's shaking up the worldview. It's
Yes.
shifting the meaning making that's gone on,
Yeah.
which is an act of playfulness in itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think when again, you see that playing out when you have someone who is stuck with their mindset, and particularly when they're quite senior, so in an organization or within a family, the kind of their position in a family. Actually, when that person's stuck and it's left unchallenged, again, everyone else that's role modeling to everyone else that that's how we think here. And that's quite damaging. That can really undermine. You have some people over here trying to do amazing things and get everyone to open up and to be experimental and to collaborate and so on. And you've got just one individual who has a fixed mindset, who's quite stuck in a way of thinking, who's maybe quite vocal about it, or certainly puts that into practice in terms of what they're expecting. And of course, that undermines. And I think people sometimes forget the power of a single employee or a single person in a family who their behavior that's left kind of unchallenged or they're not expectations aren't clear about them, they're not how to account in terms of how they behave. It's really everyone else sees it and it
Mhm.
really shapes how everyone else interprets what's okay and what's not okay in that environment.
Yeah, and then how they act as well around them,
Yeah.
or not even around them.
Yeah.
They'll take that model with them and then
Yeah,
develop it and
exactly.
create it in another environment.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
And I think that a really good example of that is when people talk about values all the time. There's so many people talk about values. It's like, well, that's great. And people now understand we shouldn't just have a set of values on the wall. We should really think about them, and they should be meaningful. But still, when people think about those, meaningful values, they don't necessarily think about the behaviors that drive them. So if we were to look around now in our family or in my friendship group or in my workplace, what am I actually seeing? So if I was to be a fly on the wall and say, I wonder what this set of values would be in this place, it'd be really interesting to get people to write that down almost as an observer. And then this is what we're actually demonstrating. Does that feel right to us?
Mm,
And it's like, maybe not. Maybe actually there's a disconnect between what's really happening and what we want to happen. So actually, what's important to us and what does that look like in practice? And how can we move closer to achieving that? But you've got to be clear about what that looks like first. So that's actually how we relate to each other, how we talk to each other, how we deal with our emotions, how we problem solve, all that stuff.
yeah, because when you walk into those companies, and there are some companies that get values really good, but and they are meaningful, and they do follow them. But before I throw everybody under the bus, but then there are the companies who think it's enough just to have a cheesy slogan in like the reception area that we value our
Yeah.
employees and they're our biggest asset. It's normally roughly what it says,
Yeah, yeah,
and then you kind of go around and they're just shouting at each other and not listening to each other.
yeah.
Um,
I know. And actually I've been to organizations where they actually have a really good set of values. The whole leadership team are behind them. They live and breathe them, but there'll be one individual who doesn't. And that person, the impact that one individual can have on everyone else cannot be underestimated.
yeah, absolutely. It's kind of that rotten apple that
Yeah.
that just spreads into the.
Yeah.
I don't know where the metaphor goes. Into the entire fruit bowl. But where this is kind of taking me, and I know we've only got a few more minutes together, where this is taking me, and this is something I don't think I've discussed on the podcast so far, but one of the areas I hope playfulness is actually adopted is if we take this to the extreme, what we're talking about, being more open, accepting others' views, then hopefully we end up finding that playfulness is also key to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm,
um, which to most people, I mean, most people, even the idea of bringing playfulness into the workplace is like one step too far at the moment. But the
mm,
idea that it might actually solve DE and I,
mm,
but I believe that it is. It's kind of take it from its kind of evolutionary roots of bringing us together as tribes. Because I honestly believe that the communities or the workplaces we have now are one of the last communities we have left.
mm,
That we used to know our neighbours on the street. Now, most people don't know them at all. We've replaced it with digital networks and social networks, and they only skim the surface of life. They don't really let us to see people in full authenticity. And so we end up with workplaces being one of the last places where we have common values, common goals, and a common objective. And the sad bit is at the moment that we've dehumanized them so much that they're not a
mm.
community.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant observation. I think, yeah, I completely agree. It's um one of the dangers of people being working remotely is that sense of isolation. And we know that there was a real rise in loneliness, particularly younger people, during the pandemic, and actually there are a lot of people who are feeling very isolated still. And that sense of being able to bring people together, no matter we're talking about different tribes and so on, but actually think about the different generations, in the workplace. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter who you are, where you come from, how you identify. You should be able to come along to your workplace and be accepted for who you are. And I think when you're right that actually there are very few places left that have that sense of community, and actually workplaces really lend themselves to that. And the richness you get from bringing different people together from different backgrounds, whatever that whatever that means. Um, you're open to hearing different experiences and different views of the world, and learning. And it goes back full circle to that curiosity. If like people talk, you know, a lot about how do I communicate with this group over here who are different to me. for whatever reason, it's like, well, just ask them. just actually just say, I I haven't, I'm not familiar with talking or hanging out with or working with um people of, I don't know, your age, gender, whatever it is. Tell me what is going to be most useful. Tell me how you like to connect. Tell me what really winds you up. It doesn't matter. And actually, it's really good. It's really good practice, regardless of who you're working with, to say, what do you need from me, and what can I do for you, and how can we connect in our best way, and what are some really good expectations. And actually, I respect you, whatever, however you identify. If we're talking about ED and I, and if I say something or do something that inadvertently causes offence, then please, please, please just tell me, because I don't mean to be offensive. It just might be, I don't know what is the correct terminology to use, for example. And I think what I'm seeing again is that fear, going back to kind
Mhm.
of fear and stress. It's almost got to the point, or I was certainly seeing it a few years ago, some teams I was working with. Everyone's so afraid of saying the wrong thing that no one says anything at all. And suddenly it means that everyone sits in their little silos, not connecting or reaching out, because I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And again, if we just put that on the table and said, we want to pull together, we recognize there's a real richness of people in this room, there's a real sense of diversity, which is really exciting. Let's look at how, consciously, how we're going to work together and connect with each other in the most meaningful way. What can get in the way of that? What do we do about that? And just start to start pulling people together as a team and saying, how do we work well together? And again, that's just the same, whatever team you're working with, those are just a good set of questions.
Yeah, utterly. And what, kind of when you were talking then about, kind of people were afraid to speak up, so they said nothing.
Mm,
The irony is that everything was still said. It's just they didn't use words. It
yeah,
was just
yeah, yeah, yeah.
became a felt sense in an environment, and everyone picked up on it, and everyone knew what everyone else was really thinking and wanting to say anyway.
Yeah.
And so people didn't work around it. It's just the environment became isolating and potentially toxic. And I think
Yeah.
kind of the last place that I'd kind of take this is when we really stand back. What we realize, it's not just about, it's nice to embrace people and kind of have a team. But when we look at history, like the long history of humanity as a species, the moments we've made the most rapid progress are the moments we come together and we embrace what I'd call collective intelligence. It's not the opposite. Hollywood's done a really, really good job of telling us that it's about lone brilliance. And and history tells us it's the exact opposite. There is no
Yeah.
such thing as lone brilliance.
No. You can't have one person who is brilliant at everything. You have to be very clear about what your strengths are. And I always say to people, be very clear about what your strengths are, but be very clear about what your gaps are as well, because you then need to surround yourself with the right people to fill those gaps. It's not about trying to fill those gaps yourself. It'd be a bit like, I can't remember who it was that said once, you get a really amazing tennis player who's a right-handed tennis player. Imagine turning around to them one day and saying, actually, you've got to now work on your left hand because you need to be just as good. It's like, really? So actually being clear about, I'm really, I really ace at this stuff, but I'm not so good at that stuff. And I just need to make sure I'm pulling the people in around me into my team who collectively we excel. Because if any one person thinks they can do it on their own, they are gonna they are gonna give themselves one big headache for all sorts of reasons. Because it's just, you can't be brilliant at everything. So yeah, collective intelligence all the way.
Yeah, and actually there was a brilliant study done on this. I'm trying to remember what the book was called. I think it's something like Now Talk About Your Strengths. I think it's an 80s or 70s book, but it
Okay.
was a brilliant study. I think it then fed into a lot of the Gallup study
Mm,
material,
yeah.
looking at character strengths. And one of the things they found is as somebody became more senior in a workplace, they tend to work away from their strengths and actually more embrace their weaknesses, because the
Mm,
organization goes, okay, well, you're a great keynote speaker, but you're not very good at accounting. or whatever ridiculous idea it might be. So we're going to send you on a course with accounting.
Yeah.
And instead of actually playing to their strength and bringing
Mm,
in others,
mm,
and then we get into the whole process of then they're not living authentically, they're not actually using their strengths.
yeah.
Le-
And they're not happy because they're not doing what they wanted to be doing. Which ultimately, if you're, if you want to do well in your job and you want to enjoy your job, you've got to be doing what you love doing. And I would say to people, if you're in a job, and this really kind of is relevant for a lot of leaders and managers. If you're in a job and actually you really hate connecting with people, you've ended up just working up that ladder because that's the progress um, kind of chain in your organization. Just own that and just say, and I've spoken to an MD before of a company who said, I hate speaking to people. As soon as he said that, he got someone else on the leadership team in to do all the people side of his business. So all the kind of the one-to-ones, all that checking in stuff, all the, he could run meetings and stuff, but actually doing the kind of the one-to-one stuff, he would hide away in his office.
Mhm.
It's like, well, rather than hide from that and worry about that, and then that form as part of your reputation, and people are like, gosh, he's really bad at that. Own it and just say, you are excellent at this stuff, strategy, being, it's a startup company. You are amazing at this stuff over here. The people side, not so great. It doesn't matter because you have got someone in your organization who is excellent at that. Use her to do it. And as soon as they just made that really simple shift, it was a game changer.
I love that example. Lisa,
Yeah.
we've run out of time and we could keep going for another few days. Where I want to finish is, can you tell people where they can find out more about you and what you do? And then I can make sure any links are kind of in the show notes so that they
Yeah.
can easily find you.
Yes. Thank you. Well, definitely on LinkedIn. So, I love, I'm a bit of a random LinkedIn poster, so I will have a splurge every so often and I'll disappear from the radar. But so LinkedIn, definitely connect with me there or send me an email. But and check out my website. I have different blogs. I have different resources on there. I actually have some things on there for helping teams have conversations around
Amazing.
some of that is useful to talk about. But yeah, just reach out. I just love having conversations like these. When someone goes, I'm not sure about this, it's like, well, let's chat about it. So yeah, I would love anyone who wants to kind of go, I don't agree with what you just said, or tell me more about that, or whatever. Very happy for people to
Brilliant.
reach
I
out.
will I will make sure the links to your website and LinkedIn are in the show notes, and then people can easily find you. Thank you so much for such a brilliant conversation.
Oh, I've loved that. It's whiz past, and yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Impact comes from turning ideas into behavioural changes. So I'd urge you to think about what you're taking from the conversation today and what you're going to do with it. How can the messages from the conversation make a real difference to how you're showing up or supporting and empowering others? Do reach out to me directly to discuss your challenges and development needs at work, and connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not already acquainted. All the links you need are in the show notes. Finally, please review the podcast on Apple or wherever you listen so that more people get to hear the expertise from the guests and I. We're all about affecting real change. Thanks for joining me today.